The numbers on the microwave glowed green in the darkness. 2:47 a.m. Most people would be asleep at this hour, lost in dreams or nightmares. But for me, this was neither. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment everything I'd carefully constructed over the past 4 months would finally click into place. My name is Elena Cross. I'm 34 years old. And tonight, I'm about to destroy the man who thought he owned me. Welcome to Tea and Payback, where the tea is hot, the secrets are messy, and karma always finds her way home. Now sit down, pour yourself a cup of tea, let's continue. The silence in our apartment was thick enough to choke on. 1,500 square feet of polished surfaces and expensive furniture, all bought with my money and his promises. The kind of place that looks perfect in photographs, but feels hollow when you're standing in it alone at 3 a.m, waiting for your husband to stumble home from another woman's bed. I wasn't crying. I'd stopped crying 3 months ago, right around the time I realized tears were a waste of salt and water on a man who mistook them for weakness. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights flicker like dying stars. Behind me, I heard the elevator ding, then footsteps. Heavy, confident, careless. The sound of a man who believed he was untouchable. The front door crashed open with more force than necessary, and there he was. My husband. The man I'd pledged my life to 6 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than most people's cars. He looked immaculate, as always. Charcoal gray suit that probably cost $3,000. Hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. But there was something else too. The unmistakable smell of someone else's perfume. Cheap, floral, aggressive. The kind of scent that announces itself before the wearer even enters the room. Marcus didn't even try to hide it anymore. Why would he? In his mind, the mortgage papers we'd both signed were chains around my ankles, keeping me locked in place no matter what he did. He thought that signature made me his property, his captive audience for whatever cruelty he felt like performing. He swaggered into the living room, loosening his tie with one hand, and I could see it written all over his face. That smug, self-satisfied expression that said he'd won something, that he was the prize everyone wanted. His eyes were cloudy from expensive whiskey, but they still carried that predatory gleam. The look of a man who'd just proven to himself how desirable he was. 6 years. That's how long I'd played the role of the understanding wife. The patient partner who believed that love and loyalty would eventually break through his selfishness. I'd convinced myself that the man I married was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of arrogance and ambition. But I'd been wrong. The man I married never existed. He was just a character Marcus played long enough to get what he wanted. A co-signer for his dreams. A safety net for his failures. A decorative piece to complete the picture of success he was selling to the world. Marcus stopped directly in front of me. He didn't bother maintaining even the pretense of respect anymore. He leaned in close, and I could smell the bourbon on his breath mixing with that cheap perfume. His lips curled into something that might have been a smile on a different face. On his, it looked like a sneer. "What are you staring at?" His voice was loud, deliberately harsh. He wanted a reaction. Needed it, actually. A fight would let him play the victim tomorrow at the office. Poor Marcus, stuck with a hysterical wife who doesn't understand him. He moved even closer, invading my space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. I met the most incredible woman tonight. She's everything you're not. Young, exciting, successful in her own right. You know what you are? You're like an old piece of furniture that's been around so long nobody even sees it anymore. Worn out, faded, ready for replacement. He paused, savoring his own cruelty. Did you really think I'd answer to you? My accountant wife who sits at home managing spreadsheets? Go ahead. Cry. Scream. Break something. I actually enjoy watching you fall apart. It reminds me why I prefer spending time with women who appreciate what I've accomplished. He stood there, breathing heavily, waiting for the explosion. The tears. The accusations. The drama that would feed his ego and let him walk into work tomorrow, as the misunderstood hero of his own story. But I gave him nothing. Not a word. Not a tear. Not even a change in expression. I simply looked at him, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time in years. This wasn't a man. This was an empty suit stuffed with arrogance and debt. A hollow shell that mistook cruelty for strength and betrayal for sophistication. I turned away from him without speaking. My silk robe whispered against the marble floor as I walked toward the bedroom, each step measured and deliberate. Behind me, I could feel his confusion radiating like heat. My silence had stolen something from him. The satisfaction he craved. The validation that his cruelty had landed. For just a moment, I heard uncertainty creep into his breathing. But then he recovered, pouring himself another drink and muttering something about me being dramatic. He stumbled into the bedroom 15 minutes later and collapsed onto his side of the bed, unconscious before his head hit the pillow. I lay there in the darkness, perfectly still, listening to him snore. He dreamed of penthouses and sports cars, and the promotion he was certain was coming. He dreamed of her, probably. The woman from tonight, whose name I already knew, was Vanessa Chen, 26 years old. Works in marketing at a firm that handles luxury brands. Loves expensive dinners and men who can afford them. I knew all of this because I'd known about her for 2 months. Just like I'd known about the 3 before her. Marcus thought he was careful. He wasn't. He was sloppy and arrogant, which made him predictable. And predictable men are easy to destroy. The clock read 4:13 a.m. when I finally moved. I slipped out of bed, grabbed the prepaid phone I'd hidden in my study, and typed out a message I'd been composing in my head for weeks. The words flowed easily because I'd rehearsed them 100 times. Short, precise, devastating. I hit send and watched the message disappear into the digital void, carrying with it the first domino in a chain reaction Marcus would never see coming. Then I turned off the phone, tucked it back into its hiding place, and returned to bed. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt nothing but the cold, crystalline clarity of purpose. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know because he'd never bothered to actually see me as a person, was that I'd been planning this for months. Every detail, every contingency, every possible outcome mapped out with the same precision I brought to my work as a senior logistics coordinator. The same skills that made me invaluable at Sterling Global Solutions. The kind of problem-solving that involved managing million-dollar supply chains across 3 continents. I'd turned inward, toward him, toward his carefully constructed house of cards. But this story doesn't start at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. It starts 3 months earlier, on a Saturday afternoon that smelled like rain and fresh-cut grass. I'd driven 2 hours to visit my mother in her small house on the outskirts of Riverside. She was in her garden when I arrived, pruning roses with the kind of focused intensity she brought to everything. My mother, Grace, was 61 years old and carried the weight of hard lessons in the lines around her eyes. 23 years ago, my father had left her for his secretary. A cliché so predictable it would be funny if it hadn't devastated her financially and emotionally. "Elena, sweetheart," she said, setting down her pruning shears and pulling off her gardening gloves. "You look tired. More than tired. You look like you're carrying something heavy." We sat on her back porch, drinking iced tea that was too sweet but somehow perfect. The silence between us was comfortable, the kind that comes from years of understanding. Finally, I told her everything. About Marcus, about Vanessa and the others, about the late nights and the lies, and the way he looked at me like I was an inconvenience he had to tolerate. My mother listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of experience. "Your father used to come home smelling like her perfume. I'd cry and beg and threaten to leave. You know what that did? It bored him, made him feel more justified in his choice. Tears don't touch men like that, Elena. Tears just confirm they made the right decision to find excitement elsewhere. She picked up her pruning shears again, examining the blade in the afternoon light. You don't need hot fire, sweetheart. Hot fire burns everything, including you. It leaves you exhausted and empty while they walk away unscathed. You need cold fire. The kind that burns slow and precise. The kind that doesn't consume you while it's consuming them. She looked at me directly, her eyes sharp and knowing. Find what he values more than anything. Not you, because he's already shown you don't matter to him. Find what he actually worships. His image, his money, his status. And take it from him with the same cold logic he uses to dismiss your feelings. That's not revenge, Elena. That's justice. And justice doesn't leave you hollow. It sets you free. Those words changed everything. I stopped seeing my situation as a marriage in crisis and started seeing it as a problem to solve. A complex logistical challenge that required research, planning, and flawless execution. I drove home that day with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The tears dried up. The anger crystallized into something harder and more useful. Purpose. The first thing I did was inventory my assets. Not financial assets, though those mattered too. I inventoried information, knowledge, connections. I was a senior logistics coordinator at one of the most respected supply chain firms in the city. I managed relationships with vendors, contractors, and clients across multiple industries. I understood how systems worked, how information flowed, how a single disruption in the wrong place could collapse an entire operation. And I realized I had something Marcus didn't know about. Something he'd taken credit for but never actually earned. 3 years ago, at a networking event I'd attended reluctantly, I'd met Bradford and Nina Sullivan. He was a structural engineer. She was a venture capitalist. They were looking to buy a luxury property as an investment, something in the $6 million range. I'd mentioned it casually to Marcus, who'd immediately smelled opportunity. He'd charmed them, taken over the relationship, and positioned himself as their exclusive agent. But here's what Marcus never knew. Bradford and Nina kept in touch with me. They'd send occasional emails asking my opinion on properties, trusting my analytical eye more than Marcus's sales pitch. They valued precision over persuasion, facts over flattery. They respected me in a way Marcus never had. 2 months before that night at 2:47 a.m., I'd received an email from Bradford. He and Nina were finally ready to pull the trigger on their investment property. Marcus had shown them a stunning estate in Ashford Heights, an exclusive neighborhood where homes started at $5 million and climbed from there. The commission on that sale would be enormous. Enough to cover 3/4 of our mortgage and cement Marcus's reputation as a top-tier agent. He'd already started spending the money in his mind, talking about the luxury sedan he was going to buy and the vacation to the Maldives he deserved. But Bradford's email contained a question. A small, technical question about the property's foundation. He'd noticed something in the geological survey that seemed incomplete. As a structural engineer, he knew what to look for, and something didn't add up. He asked if I could check with Marcus about the missing documentation. I told Bradford I'd look into it. Then I did something Marcus would never expect. I actually looked into it. I still had contacts from my previous job at Meridian Engineering Group. People who owed me favors. People who valued competence and returned loyalty with loyalty. I reached out to an old colleague named David who worked in geotechnical assessment. I asked him casually if he knew anything about the Ashford Heights development. He did, and what he told me made my blood run cold, not with shock, but with opportunity. The property Marcus was selling had a serious problem. The foundation was built on unstable soil near a high water table. The developer had commissioned a full geological report that identified the issue clearly. Significant risk of settling and structural cracking within 3 to 5 years. The kind of defect that would tank the property's value by at least 30% the moment it became public knowledge. This wasn't a minor issue. This was fraud. Marcus knew about it. He had to know. And he was hiding it to secure his commission. I requested copies of the geological reports through David, who accessed them through professional channels. Everything was documented: the soil instability, the risk assessment, the developer's awareness of the problem, and buried in Marcus's own client notes, which I accessed through his laptop one night while he was passed out drunk, I found his strategy: downplay the issue, redirect questions, close the deal before anyone dug too deep. He'd written it out plainly, with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he was too smart to get caught. I didn't confront him. Confrontation was hot fire, and hot fire was useless. Instead, I made copies of everything. I documented every conversation, every email, every piece of evidence that proved Marcus knew about the defect and was deliberately concealing it. Then I waited. I needed the timing to be perfect. I needed him to be so close to success that the fall would shatter him completely. But there was more work to do. I couldn't just destroy Marcus's deal. I had to ensure I'd land on my feet when everything collapsed. So I started rebuilding my own foundation while his was crumbling invisibly beneath him. I reached out to my former supervisor at Meridian Engineering Group, a man named Robert Harrison who'd always valued my work. I explained my situation carefully, professionally. I was planning to divorce. I needed to ensure my career wouldn't suffer from the fallout. I needed stability and a strong reference for the bank when I filed for mortgage restructuring. Robert didn't hesitate. He offered me a promotion on the spot: Director of International Supply Chain Operations. A 40% raise. The kind of position that would make me financially independent and give me leverage in any legal proceedings. But I asked him to hold the official offer until I was ready. I needed the timing to be surgical. Everything had to happen at once: the destruction of Marcus's deal, the filing for divorce, the revelation of my new position. One devastating cascade that would leave him no time to recover or retaliate. I consulted with lawyers. 3 different firms, actually, until I found one who understood what I needed. Not someone who'd try to negotiate or find middle ground. I needed someone who understood cold fire. I found him in Charles Montgomery, a family law attorney with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He laid out the strategy clearly: document everything, secure my own income first, file for mortgage restructuring based on his job loss and my financial stability. The law was on my side as long as I executed perfectly. Every piece fell into place. My new job offer, held in reserve. The geological reports and Marcus's notes, safely copied and stored. Bradford and Nina, waiting for my signal. Charles Montgomery, ready to file papers the moment I gave the word. I'd built a machine designed for one purpose: to methodically dismantle Marcus's life with the same cold precision he'd used to dismiss mine. The night he came home at 2:47 a.m., reeking of Vanessa's perfume and overflowing with smug superiority, wasn't random. I'd been tracking his patterns. I knew he'd been with her. I knew he'd be drunk on bourbon and arrogance. I knew he'd try to provoke me, to manufacture drama that would justify his choices. And I knew my silence would confuse him more than any argument. That confusion was important. I needed him off balance, distracted, confident enough to let his guard down completely. At 4:13 a.m., I sent the message to Bradford Sullivan. It was simple and devastating. The Ashford Heights deal is compromised. Marcus has concealed critical foundation defects. I have the full geological reports and his notes documenting the fraud. Do not sign anything. Do not transfer any money. Call me at 9 a.m. tomorrow. This is not a misunderstanding. This is deliberate deception. I turned off the phone and waited for morning. Marcus slept like a corpse, dreaming of the victory he'd never claim. I didn't sleep at all. I lay there in the darkness, feeling nothing but the steady pulse of anticipation. Everything was in motion now. The first domino had fallen. The rest would follow with mathematical precision. Marcus woke up at 7 a.m., groggy and hungover, but still riding high on his own sense of invincibility. He showered, shaved, put on another expensive suit. He was supposed to call his broker, Adrian Reeves, at 9 a.m. to confirm the closing date for the Ashford Heights deal. I could see it in his face. He was already counting the money, already imagining the respect, the admiration, the validation that this sale would bring. He gulped down coffee, scrolled through his phone, and smiled at something. Probably a text from Vanessa. He didn't even look at me as I left for work. I was furniture. Background. Irrelevant. At 8:47 a.m., Marcus's phone rang. I wasn't there to see it, but I knew exactly what was happening because I'd orchestrated every second. Bradford Sullivan's name lit up the screen. Marcus probably answered with confidence, expecting to confirm some final detail before the sale closed. Instead, he heard words that stopped his heart. "Marcus, what the hell is this about foundation defects?" Bradford's voice was controlled, but seething with betrayal. "Elena just sent us geological reports showing the property has serious structural issues. She said you've been hiding this deliberately." She used the word fraud, Marcus. "She sent us your own notes where you outlined how to downplay the issue and close before we discovered it. We were about to wire $1.2 million this morning. Were you actually going to let us buy a property you knew was defective?" I imagined Marcus's face going pale, the coffee in his stomach turning to acid, the room tilting. "Bradford, that's insane. Elena, she's been unstable lately. Emotional. This is probably some kind of misunderstanding. The property is fine. I personally vetted everything." His voice probably cracked, desperation creeping in around the edges. Misunderstanding. Bradford's tone went from hot to Arctic. "I'm a structural engineer, Marcus. I know how to read these reports. The soil instability is documented. The risk of settling is real. And your notes make it clear you knew about this and chose not to disclose it. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. Nina and I are contacting your broker immediately. We're pulling out of this deal, and we're going to make sure everyone knows why. You tried to scam us, Marcus. After we trusted you. After Elena vouched for you 3 years ago. You're done." The line went dead. Marcus stood there in his expensive suit, in his expensive apartment, feeling the ground disappear beneath his feet. He tried calling back. Bradford and Nina had already blocked his number. He tried texting. Nothing. They'd cut him off completely. Then his phone rang again. This time it was Adrian Reeves, his broker. The man who'd been patting him on the back for weeks, talking about what a massive win this sale would be for the firm. "Marcus, what in God's name have you done?" Adrian's voice wasn't angry yet. It was worse. It was frightened. "Bradford Sullivan just called me. He said you tried to sell him a property with known structural defects. He said he has documentation proving you concealed geological reports. He said your wife gave him everything, including your notes where you planned how to hide the information. Marcus, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't commit fraud using our firm's reputation as cover." Marcus probably tried to explain, tried to deflect, tried to blame me for sabotaging him out of jealousy or spite. But Adrian wasn't listening anymore. "Marcus, I don't care about your marriage problems. I care that you've put our entire firm at risk. Bradford Sullivan is connected to half the developers in this city. If word gets out that we knowingly sold a defective property, we're finished. Our reputation, our licensing, everything. I've already called our legal team. We're cutting ties with you immediately. You're fired, Marcus. Effective right now. Don't come to the office. Don't contact any clients. Your access to company systems has already been revoked. And if Bradford decides to sue, we'll be cooperating fully with any investigation. You did this to yourself." Another deadline. Another connection severed. Marcus's perfect world, the one built on charm and deception, and the belief that he was too clever to fail, collapsed in less than 20 minutes. The deal that was supposed to make him untouchable had vaporized. His job was gone. His reputation was destroyed. And the woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant furniture had orchestrated every second of it. But I wasn't done. Not even close. While Marcus was spiraling in our apartment, staring at his phone and trying to understand how his life had imploded, I was at a bank across town, meeting with Charles Montgomery and a loan officer. presenting my new employment contract as Director of International Supply Chain Operations, demonstrating my financial stability, filing for immediate mortgage restructuring based on Marcus's sudden unemployment and documented fraudulent behavior that made him a liability. The bank officer reviewed my application with professional efficiency. Marcus's name was already flagged in their system. Adrian Reeves had moved quickly, notifying financial partners that Marcus was no longer employed and under investigation for fraud. The bank officer looked at me with something like sympathy. "Mrs. Cross, given your husband's current status and your demonstrated financial stability, we're prepared to approve your restructuring application. The property will be sold and proceeds divided according to the court's determination. Given the circumstances, we expect the majority of equity will be allocated to you as the financially responsible party." I signed the papers without hesitation. Charles Montgomery filed the divorce petition immediately afterward. Everything happened in one smooth, devastating sequence. By noon, Marcus had lost his job, his largest sale, and any claim to the home he thought trapped me. By 1 p.m., he'd received notification from the bank's legal department informing him of the restructuring application. By 2 p.m., he was sitting in our apartment, surrounded by the expensive things he could no longer afford, realizing that the woman he'd betrayed had just taken everything. But here's where the story takes a turn even I didn't expect. A twist that proved Marcus's entire life was built on delusions. In his desperation, after losing everything in a single morning, Marcus did what weak men always do. He called the woman he thought valued him, Vanessa Chun, the young, exciting marketing professional who'd been so impressed by his success and generosity. He called her looking for comfort, for support, for someone to tell him he was still valuable, still desirable, still worth something. "Vanessa, I need to talk to you. Something terrible happened. I lost my job. My wife, she sabotaged a deal, and I'm being accused of fraud, but it's not true. I need somewhere to stay for a few days while I figure this out. Can I come over? I just need someone who believes in me right now." His voice probably shook. The confident swagger completely gone, replaced by raw need. There was a pause on the other end. A pause that lasted just long enough to be cruel. Then Vanessa's voice came through, and it wasn't warm anymore. It wasn't the breathy, flirtatious tone she used over expensive dinners. It was cold, calculating, disappointed. "Marcus, you lost your job? You were just telling me yesterday about the huge commission you were about to earn. You said you were going to buy a Porsche. You said you were one of the top agents in the city. What do you mean you lost everything?" It was a setup. My wife, she's vindictive. She's trying to destroy me because I found someone who actually appreciates me. But I'll bounce back. I'm talented. I just need a few weeks to find a new position, and I'll be back on top. Can I stay with you? Just temporarily. The desperation in his voice probably made him sound pathetic, because that's what he was. A pathetic man whose worth was measured entirely in dollars and status. Vanessa laughed. Not a kind laugh. A dismissive, almost disgusted sound. "Marcus, let me be really clear about something. You and we had an arrangement. You're a successful man who takes me to nice places and buys me nice things. I'm a beautiful woman who makes you feel desirable and important. That's what this was. But you're not successful anymore, are you? You lost your job. You're being accused of fraud. You're about to lose your apartment. So what exactly do you bring to the table now? But I thought we had something real. I chose you over my marriage. I risked everything for you." His voice probably cracked, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You chose me because I made you feel like a winner. And I spent time with you because winners can afford to treat me well. But you're not a winner anymore, Marcus. You're a failure who got caught. And I don't date failures. My apartment isn't a shelter for men who can't handle their own lives. Find somewhere else to go. And don't call me again. This was fun while you had money. Now it's just sad." She hung up without waiting for a response. Marcus sat there with the dead phone, and I imagined something finally broke inside him. Not his pride. that was already shattered. Something deeper. The fundamental delusion that he was special. That people valued him for who he was rather than what he could provide. Vanessa, the woman he'd thrown away his marriage for, had just proven she was exactly as transactional and shallow as he was. She was a mirror, showing him his own emptiness. And he couldn't look away. The next 2 months were systematic demolition. Marcus tried desperately to find new employment. He updated his resume, called every contact in his network, applied to dozens of firms. But Adrian Reeves had moved fast and thoroughly. He'd contacted every major brokerage in the city, explaining that Marcus was under investigation for fraud and that their firm would be pursuing legal action if Bradford Sullivan decided to sue. Marcus's name became toxic overnight. Applications went unanswered. Interviews were canceled. The few people who did respond offered polite rejections that all said the same thing. We've heard about the situation, and we can't risk our reputation. His appearance started to deteriorate. The expensive haircuts grew out. The daily shaves became occasional. He wore the same shirt multiple days in a row because doing laundry seemed pointless when you had nowhere to go. He lost weight, not from exercise but from stress and an inability to afford the restaurants he'd once frequented. The gym membership lapsed. The luxury sedan got repossessed when he missed payments. He started looking like what he'd become, a man with nothing. Meanwhile, I moved forward with surgical precision. Robert Harrison made my promotion official. I started my new role as Director of International Supply Chain Operations with a salary that made me genuinely independent for the first time in my adult life. I found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Riverside, near my mother, with windows that let in natural light and a view of actual trees instead of concrete and steel. I paid cash for the first year's rent using my share of the sale proceeds from our apartment. No mortgage, no debt, no ties to Marcus or the life we'd shared. I completed the master's program in supply chain management I'd started 2 years earlier, but put on hold because Marcus said it was unnecessary. I earned my certification in international logistics. I started traveling for work, building relationships with vendors in Singapore, Frankfurt, Sao Paulo. I was good at my job, better than good. Without Marcus's constant undermining, I flourished. The divorce was finalized in record time. Charles Montgomery ensured everything was airtight. The court determined that Marcus's fraudulent behavior and sudden unemployment made him unable to maintain joint assets. I received 65% of the proceeds from the apartment sale. Marcus got 35%, minus legal fees and the portion allocated to pay off his personal debts I hadn't known about. Credit cards maxed out on gifts for Vanessa and nights at expensive bars. He walked away with roughly $43,000 from a home we'd purchased together 6 years earlier. I walked away with $127,000 and my dignity. Marcus ended up moving in with his aunt, Gloria, a retired schoolteacher who lived on the outskirts of the city in a small house that smelled like mothballs and regret. Gloria took him in on the condition that he contribute to household expenses and help with maintenance. She wasn't kind about it. She reminded him daily that he'd thrown away a good woman and a stable life for ego and cheap thrills. She made him mow the lawn, clean the gutters, fix the leaky bathroom faucet. Domestic work he'd always considered beneath him. Work he'd expected me to handle while he pursued his important career. Eventually, Marcus found employment. Not in real estate. No firm would touch him. He got a job in a warehouse loading trucks for a logistics company. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was now working in the industry I'd built my career in, but at the absolute bottom, doing manual labor for $16 an hour while I managed multi-million-dollar supply chains from an office with a view. His hands developed calluses. His back ached constantly. He came home every night smelling like cardboard and exhaustion. Everything he'd feared becoming, every version of himself he'd considered failure, he now embodied completely. One evening, about 4 months after our divorce was finalized, Charles Montgomery called me. "Elena, I wanted to inform you that all legal proceedings are complete. You and Marcus have no remaining financial or legal connections. The divorce is final. The assets are divided. You're entirely free." He paused. "Marcus asked me to relay one question to you. He wanted to know if you felt any satisfaction from what you did to him. Any sense of victory." I thought about that question carefully. Did I feel satisfaction? Victory? Those words implied emotion, passion, investment, and I felt none of those things. "Tell him," I said slowly, "that I feel nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret, just complete and total indifference. He's irrelevant to my life now, and he always will be. What happened to him wasn't revenge. It was consequence. He built his life on fraud and arrogance, and it collapsed under its own weight. I just removed the supports he thought were holding him up." Charles was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that stayed with me. "You know, in 20 years of practicing family law, I've never seen someone execute justice this cleanly. Most people let emotion drive them. They want their ex-partner to hurt the way they hurt. But you just wanted your freedom and your dignity back. And you got both." He was right. I hadn't destroyed Marcus out of hatred or a desire for revenge. I destroyed him because he was an obstacle to the life I deserved. He'd positioned himself as the foundation of our existence, the breadwinner, the important one. But he was actually dead weight, a parasite draining my resources and energy. And when you identify dead weight, you cut it loose. You don't agonize over it. You don't mourn it. You just release it and watch it sink. But the story doesn't end there. Because 6 months after the divorce, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus had been seen at a community center, attending a support group for men going through divorce. Someone said he looked different, quieter, more humble. The arrogance that used to define him had been replaced by something that looked like introspection. I didn't care enough to investigate further, but the information sat in my mind like a curious footnote. Then, almost a year after everything collapsed, I received a letter, an actual physical letter, delivered to my office. The return address was Gloria's house. I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity, that small human weakness, got the better of me. I opened it. The handwriting was Marcus's, but messier than I remembered. Less confident. The letter was short. "Elena, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to care. But I needed to write it anyway, for myself if no one else. I destroyed our marriage. I destroyed my career. I destroyed every relationship I had because I believed success was measured in money and status and the admiration of people who didn't actually know me. I treated you like you were worthless because you didn't fit my definition of valuable. I was wrong about everything. You weren't the problem. I was. You weren't weak. I was. You weren't irrelevant. I was. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that losing everything was the only way I could finally see clearly. You were right to leave. You were right to protect yourself. I hope you're happy. I hope you never think about me at all. You deserve that peace." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Not because it changed anything. Not because I felt sympathy or forgiveness or any renewed connection to the man who wrote it, but because it was proof. Proof that cold fire works. Proof that sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone isn't to destroy them with rage, but to remove yourself so completely from their life that they're forced to confront who they actually are without you. I never responded to the letter. There was nothing to say. Marcus was learning the lesson my mother had tried to teach me years ago. Hot fire burns everything, including the person wielding it. Cold fire burns clean. It removes what needs to be removed and leaves you standing in the aftermath, whole and free. My life now is nothing like the life I had with Marcus. I travel frequently for work. I've built genuine friendships with colleagues who value competence over appearance. I've started dating again carefully, with clear boundaries and zero tolerance for disrespect. I bought a small house near my mother with a garden where I grow vegetables and roses. Simple things that feel like mine in a way nothing in that luxury apartment ever did. Sometimes people who know the story ask me if I have any regrets, if I wish I'd handled things differently, if I think I went too far. And the answer is always the same. No, I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret using the tools available to me. I don't regret refusing to be a victim of someone else's cruelty. Marcus thought the mortgage trapped me. But the only thing that ever trapped me was the belief that I needed him to survive. Once I let go of that delusion, everything else was just logistics. There's a phrase my mother used to say, something her own mother told her. A woman who knows her worth doesn't need revenge. She just removes herself from situations that don't serve her and watches nature take its course. That's what I did. I didn't destroy Marcus. I removed the scaffolding he built his delusions on. His own weight did the rest. The most interesting part of this entire experience wasn't the satisfaction of watching Marcus fall. It was discovering who I actually was without him. For 6 years, I'd defined myself in relation to his needs, his career, his moods. I'd made myself smaller to make him feel bigger. I'd muted my own ambitions so his could shine brighter. And when I finally stepped out of that shadow, I realized how much space I actually took up, how capable I actually was, how much I'd been holding myself back. My team at Sterling Global Solutions now manages supply chains for 17 major manufacturers across 4 continents. Last quarter, we reduced delivery times by 23% and cut logistics costs by $1.8 million. I negotiated a partnership with a supplier in Taipei that's projected to save our clients over $4 million annually. I did that, not Marcus with his charm and his expensive suits. Me, with my spreadsheets and my attention to detail and my ability to see the structural weaknesses in complex systems. The skills that made me good at logistics were the same skills that let me dismantle Marcus's life so efficiently. Problem identification, resource allocation, timing, risk assessment. I approached my own liberation the way I'd approach a failing supply chain. Identify the bottleneck, reroute around it, eliminate the inefficiency. Marcus was the bottleneck, the dead weight, the component that created more problems than it solved. So I eliminated him from the system and watched everything flow more smoothly without him. People sometimes tell me my story is harsh, that I was too cold, too calculating, too willing to destroy someone who'd once been my partner. But those people don't understand what it's like to be systematically diminished by someone who's supposed to love you. They don't know what it feels like to watch yourself disappear piece by piece while someone else takes credit for your existence. Marcus didn't just cheat on me. He tried to erase me, to reduce me to furniture, to background noise, to a signature on a mortgage document. And when someone tries to erase you, you have 2 choices. Let them succeed, or prove definitively that you were never erasable to begin with. I chose the second option, and I'd choose it again without hesitation. About 8 months after the letter, I ran into someone who knew Marcus, a former colleague of his named Stephen who'd worked at the same brokerage. We were both at a professional networking event downtown, the kind of industry mixer where people in expensive clothes make small talk and exchange business cards. Stephen recognized me immediately. Elena Cross, right? Marcus's ex-wife. He said it cautiously, like he wasn't sure if bringing up the past was appropriate. I heard what happened. The whole thing with the Sullivan deal. That was brutal. I smiled politely, the same professional smile I used with difficult vendors. It was necessary. Stephen nodded slowly, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. You know, Marcus used to talk about you at the office. Before everything went down, he'd make jokes about how you were just the accountant wife, how you didn't understand his world. We all laughed along because, office culture. But after what you did, pulling off that whole strategic takedown, I realized something. You understood his world better than any of us. You just chose not to play the game until you absolutely had to. I never saw it as a game, I said. I saw it as survival. Stephen was quiet for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. For what it's worth, Adrian Reeves regrets how everything went down. Not the firing, Marcus earned that. But Adrian wishes he'd noticed earlier how Marcus was treating you. He said if he'd known Marcus was that careless with his personal relationships, he would have been more careful trusting him with client relationships. The arrogance that made Marcus dismiss you is the same arrogance that made him think he could commit fraud and get away with it. That observation stayed with me. Because Stephen was right. Marcus's downfall wasn't about me being vindictive or cruel. It was about him being fundamentally flawed. A man who treats his wife like disposable furniture will eventually treat his clients, his colleagues, his career the same way. I didn't create his character defects. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of those defects. The last time I saw Marcus was completely by accident. I was leaving a coffee shop in Riverside, near my mother's house, carrying a latte and thinking about an upcoming presentation. And there he was, walking down the sidewalk in work clothes. Not his old expensive suits. Actual work clothes. Canvas pants stained with something that might have been oil or dirt. A plain gray t-shirt. Steel-toed boots. He looked older than his years, his face lined with exhaustion and something that might have been acceptance. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by something that looked like shame. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then thought better of it. He just nodded once, a tiny acknowledgement, and kept walking. I watched him go, this man who'd once seemed so large in my life, now just another tired person on a sidewalk. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. No curiosity about where he was going or what his life looked like now. Just absolute neutrality. That moment, more than anything else, confirmed that I'd truly moved on. Marcus wasn't my nemesis or my victim or my unfinished business. He was just a stranger who used to be in my life. Someone I once knew, but no longer had any connection to. And that distance, that complete emotional severing, was the real victory. Not his poverty or his humiliation or his loss of status. My freedom. My indifference. My ability to see him and feel nothing at all. My mother asked me once if I thought Marcus would ever truly understand what he'd done. If he'd ever grasp the full weight of his actions and become a better person because of it. I told her the truth. I didn't know and I didn't care. His growth or lack thereof wasn't my responsibility. My only responsibility was to myself. To build a life that reflected my actual worth. To never again accept treatment that diminished me. To remember that love without respect is just a pretty word for captivity. The scar from that marriage will always be there. Not a wound anymore, just a reminder. A line in my history that says, "This is what happens when you lose yourself in someone else's narrative." But scars can be useful. They teach you where the danger was. They remind you to be more careful next time. They prove you survived something that could have destroyed you. I survived Marcus. More than survived. I rebuilt myself into someone stronger, clearer, more aligned with my actual values. And in the process, I learned the most important lesson of my life. You don't need hot fire to fight back against someone who's hurt you. You don't need rage or drama or revenge fantasies. You just need cold, precise, strategic action aimed at one goal. Your own liberation. Cold fire doesn't burn for the satisfaction of watching someone else hurt. It burns to clear the path forward, to remove obstacles, to create space for new growth. And when it's done its work, it goes out cleanly, leaving you standing in the aftermath with nothing but possibility ahead. That's what I learned from Marcus. Not how to be cruel, but how to be free. Not how to destroy for the sake of destruction, but how to protect myself with the same ruthless efficiency I'd bring to any other critical problem. And most importantly, I learned that the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. Complete, total, liberating indifference. Marcus taught me that lesson, though not the way he intended. He thought he was teaching me my place. He thought he was showing me how insignificant I was in his grand narrative. Instead, he taught me that I didn't need to be part of anyone's narrative but my own. that my worth wasn't determined by whether someone else recognized it, that the only opinion that mattered was my own. So when people ask me if I regret what I did, if I wish I'd taken the high road and just walked away without dismantling his career and his life, I give them the honest answer. Walking away wouldn't have been the high road. It would have been the weak road. The road that left him free to do the same thing to someone else. The road that taught him nothing except that he could treat people terribly and face no real consequences. What I did wasn't revenge. It was accountability. I held him accountable for his fraud, for his betrayal, for his arrogance. I used the tools available to me, the evidence he was careless enough to leave lying around, the connections he didn't know I had, the legal system he thought would never touch him. And I did it without anger, without tears, without giving him the satisfaction of knowing he'd hurt me deeply enough to break me. That's the power of cold fire. It doesn't destroy you while it's destroying them. It doesn't leave you hollow and consumed. It just does what needs to be done, efficiently and completely, and then it goes out. And you're left standing there, whole and free, ready to build whatever comes next. I'm building a good life now. A life that's mine in every sense of the word. No compromises. No accommodations for someone else's ego. No making myself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Just me in full color, taking up exactly as much space as I deserve. And Marcus? He's somewhere in this city, loading trucks or fixing broken things or learning whatever lessons he's capable of learning. Or maybe he's not learning anything. Maybe he's still blaming me for his downfall, still convinced he was the victim of a vindictive woman rather than the architect of his own destruction. It doesn't matter. His story doesn't intersect with mine anymore. I gave him 6 years of my life. 6 years of loyalty and patience and belief that he'd eventually become the man he pretended to be. But he never was that man. He was always exactly what he showed himself to be in those final months. Arrogant, cruel, hollow. And when I finally accepted that truth, when I stopped trying to save a man who didn't want saving, everything became clear. The path forward wasn't about fixing him or changing him or making him understand. It was about removing him from my path entirely, cutting him out like a tumor, not with hot, destructive rage, but with cold, surgical precision. And once he was removed, once that dead weight was finally gone, I could breathe again. I could see the horizon again. I could remember who I was before him and become who I was always meant to be after him. That's the real story here. Not the fall of an arrogant man who got what he deserved, but the rise of a woman who refused to stay fallen, who used every skill, every connection, every ounce of intelligence she possessed to save herself, who learned that sometimes the coldest action is the kindest one you can take for yourself. My mother was right about cold fire. It doesn't consume you. It refines you. It burns away everything that doesn't serve you and leaves behind only what's essential. Your strength, your clarity, your refusal to accept less than you deserve. I'm grateful for that lesson. I'm grateful for the woman I became when I finally stopped trying to warm myself with someone else's cold heart. I'm grateful that I learned how to burn cold before I burned out completely. And if Marcus ever reads this, if he ever hears this story and recognizes himself in it, I hope he understands one thing. I didn't do this to him. He did it to himself. I just stopped standing in the way of his inevitable collapse. I stopped being the support beam holding up a structure that was always going to fall. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply step aside and let gravity do its work. Let the house of cards collapse under its own flawed design. Let the man who built his life on lies face the truth he tried so hard to avoid. That's not revenge. That's physics. That's consequence. That's the cold, undeniable reality that everything built on a false foundation eventually crumbles, whether you push it or not. I just chose not to be buried in the rubble when it fell. And now I'm standing in the clear air, in the bright sunlight, building something real on solid ground. Building a life that doesn't need lies or pretense or anyone else's validation to stand strong. That's the ending Marcus never saw coming. Not his destruction, but my complete and total indifference to whether he's destroyed or not. My freedom from caring. My liberation from ever thinking about him at all. Except as a cautionary tale I might tell someday to someone who needs to hear it. This is that tale. This is the story of how I learned to burn cold. How I learned that justice doesn't require rage, just precision. How I learned that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so good that your past becomes irrelevant. I built that life. And I'm still building it. Every day. Without Marcus. Without bitterness. Without looking back except to remember how far I've come. That's the power of cold fire. It doesn't just destroy what needs destroying. It illuminates the path forward. And I'm walking that path now, clear-eyed and free, never looking back at the ashes behind me. Only forward. Always forward. Into the life I was always meant to live.